Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's CDCT Live we'll be continuing our conversation on how to achieve efficiency, scale, and flexibility with as a service. I'm Jason Rader, your host, and with me today we have Ken Christensen and Mike Moore. Kent, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do here at Insight?
Thanks, Jason. Good to be here. I've been at Insight for quite a while, and to summarize, I am a practice director, and I put together mostly multi-vendor solutions and wrap Insight services and deliver them to our clients to give them outcomes.
Awesome. Mr. Moore?
Very similar to Kent. I actually sit in our go-to-market practice in the network and integrated security space. So I've been at Insight about 8 years now. Came in as a delivery architect, focusing on enterprise networking, routing, wireless technologies, and the integrated security solutions that go along with that.
Well, fantastic. So you guys are definitely the guys that lead us through this conversation today. So let's start off. So I like to be, if we had cold folks joining us for the first time and hadn't seen some of the previous episodes, let's talk a little bit about as a service. Mike, why don't you set us off on that?
Yeah, definitely. So, as a service, you can think of it as a new way to consume. It's not new, just another option that we have, right? So we're going to be talking a lot about the different models today, Opex versus Capex. But really, as you're thinking as a service, it's not necessarily where you own the infrastructure, right? It's something that you're paying for as a service that you can consume, scale up, scale down, and really that's it in a nutshell. Ken, you can probably elaborate really well on as a service. So I'll hand it over to you to add some color to that.
Well, as people at Insight know, it's been a passion. As a service has been game changing. I think it really is an opportunity, Jason, to be very educational for the clients. They're probably hearing about it. I see some people are starting to do commercials. I expect to see a Super Bowl commercial. But it has really given them a choice of, Capex is difficult. It's awkward. It's a barrier to innovation. And cloud works for a lot of things, and it seems like it's easy. And as a service, it's kind of, as the commercial says, I'll bring the cloud to you. And so clients are very, very interested in understanding it. And I think this is going to be a great session.
Yeah, thanks. And it's interesting that you bring that up, the commercial thing, because I'm seeing commercials as well. And, I think, back in 2019, there was a stat that said that maybe 15% of the folks were interested in this. And now that stat's significantly higher.
Yeah, we did this. We've been working with most of our partners for a long time because, we've always been able to deliver service. And so as a service, a lot of them had awkward models. So a lot of clients listening might say, I tried that 3 years ago. Didn't work. It was a financial deal. It looked like a lease, etc. Gartner came out in 2019 and said, oh, the market's going to take off. It's going to be 15%. And 2020 changed a lot of people's view about a lot of things, and it started to accelerate. And now their numbers, they've accelerated them twice this year. Now they're between 40 and 70%.
Gotcha. Thus the commercials. I think that kind of adoption or momentum in the market is definitely where folks are now trying to stake their claims. And, we'll get to that probably later on as far as we kind of differentiate folks. But I think, Mike, you brought it up. Let's talk about the Capex versus Opex model. You mentioned that too, Kent. Capex is a barrier potentially to folks getting in. So
yeah, definitely. I think over the past 18 months now, since we really started more of the work from home scenario, and it's been a little bit harder to get hardware. Lead times are through the roofs for a lot of the different vendors, right? So we've seen really all of the partners we work with pivoting a lot more to software centric or as a service, providing things as that service to our clients because we need that option, right? We need the capability. One example that I saw this past year in talking with clients was in the hospitality space. That was hit pretty hard. A lot of people weren't traveling. So obviously you need to free up some budget, some expenses, and the networking was one area that we've seen our clients turn to. So looking for infrastructure that they could have as a service, whether it's in the cloud as hyper-converged infrastructure, or whether it's something like software-defined WAN or security in the EN networking space. became really appealing to those particular clients because they didn't want to invest heavily in that Capex. They'd rather have something that's a little more, predictable spend, where they're not having to do these big purchases right up front, and being able to break that out over the life of the hardware, the service that they're doing, whether that's 3 years, 5 years, however they consume it. But I think that's where we're really starting to see that shift. And granted, it's not going to be right for everybody, right? I gave hospitality as the use case, so it's just another flavor. No one likes to go into a restaurant and have one item on the menu. We like our choices. So having the as a service model gives us the ability to free up the investment we have in all the Capex. A lot of instances, we have clients that have extreme amounts of technical debt, just aging infrastructure sitting in their data centers, sitting in their environments, and moving to an as a service model gets rid of a lot of that. I mean, it centralizes their visibility. It gets rid of that end of life, end of support, aging infrastructure that they have, and they have that ability at the scale of the cloud.
Is this financial conversation something that customers talk to you a lot about, Ken?
You know, what's interesting is Mike brings up, airlines, hospitality. Last year, they would look at it as a financial. That's actually kind of the minority of clients doing this. The majority of them, Mike brought up life cycling hardware. That stinks. And so the analogy I use, you're going to build a house. Now, you don't know how many kids you're going to have. You don't know if the mother-in-law is going to move in. So you plan very carefully. You build a house. There's a major capital outlay. That point, you have the major capital outlay. But the other part of it is you now own that house. You have to take care of that house. And if you need to change that house, it's not easy. That's Capex, right? Add on what Michael brought up, end of support, end of life, how many clients are going through that. What clients are really doing, it seems like half our clients are saying, I'm going to the cloud, no matter what, I'm going to the cloud. It's like, well, how are you going to get there? They don't know, right? They don't know how fast and, et cetera. It's like, well, what about using this as a way to get to the cloud? Because you're going to put it on a cloud-like model, and you can actually pick things up, move it to the cloud, or in some cases, move it back. And the other is just simply, as you explain to a client what as a service is, cloud-like consumption, and they're thinking about planning. Who's got visibility to their plan over 3, 4, 5 years to do Capex? So, not life cycling hardware and the flexibility. At the end of the day, what this is doing is taking risk out of a big decision like buying a house.
So this isn't just a lease, right?
That is a really good point, because leasing has been available for a long time. 4 or 5 years ago, FASB came in and said leasing doesn't work because it's still a capital outlay. It's like a mortgage in your house. And the as a service programs are very, very carefully constructed to say that you're not going to buy this hardware in a Opex model. You're going to buy a service. So in the case of storage, you're going to buy X amount of terabytes. In the case of compute, you're going to buy X amount of CPU and memory, et cetera. But you're not buying a serial number of hardware, and that's what gets you away from it being a lease.
Gotcha. No, thanks. That makes a lot of sense. And I think, back to that whole financial thing, it's interesting to me how important the finances are. It used to be we'd only talk tech to folks, right? And whether we could do something. And now we're talking business. And I think that just shows kind of the evolution of folks who do what we do. We've got to be business people as well as delivering these outcomes that we're promising from a technology perspective. Which brings up something, on the technology front, it seems like, we had HPE with GreenLake on a previous show talking about, their offering. It sounds like everybody is doing something related to this. What are the, where's it going? What differentiates folks within this market?
Well, you're right. I think the storage was the easy one, because storage is very valuable to the clients. And quite frankly, it's higher margin to the partners, right? The OEMs. You can just read their earnings reports. And so they were the ones who finally got in and said, I'm going to actually have a cloud-like offering. And storage is actually really easy to understand why you would use an as a service versus public cloud, because one storage vendor, for example, will sell the exact same service for 3 times more if you buy it from a public cloud provider than the same service if you buy it as a service. And that aligns to the Capex model. So storage was easy. Now, what we learned over the first, 2020, doing mostly storage as a service, is the clients are like, I can't run a workload on just storage. I need compute. I need network. I need security. I need data protection. And so what we've done is we've worked with all of those partners. So you mentioned GreenLake. They were talking about storage only in 2020. Now we have GreenLake powered by Insight, where we can bring in their compute. Cisco came out with Cisco Plus and said everything's going in here, but they started with compute so that we can add compute to storage and start building out, complete solutions for our clients.
So I heard something interesting about Cisco is that they're basically bringing everything to this model. Is that accurate?
Yeah, their CEO, he was on, this is live. So yesterday on CNBC, he was on. And he basically said everything in our portfolio is going. So Cisco Plus is an umbrella. And they started off with their compute and their HyperFlex, but they've already added their network. As Michael points out, we're having a briefing today about their SASE and other products and security products coming out as a service. So they're pivoting to everything as a service, starting with what they called hybrid cloud, which was their compute offerings.
Yeah, and that's really exciting because you mentioned compute. That was the easy button. And I say that lightly because obviously there was a lot of stuff to stand that up. But the networking, you think about that, that's a little more challenging, right? Because usually there's a switch on site, a wireless access point, the router, all on location. So how do you really provide that as a service without some kind of back-end financing, right? So that's why I think this is a little bit slower to the market. But now as we're seeing things go the software-defined route, like SD-WAN, having cloud security and SASE offerings where you got your CASB, your secure web gateways all hosted up in the cloud, it makes that as a service model much more consumable. So in the networking space early on, when there was an as a service offering, it was typically that infrastructure that was getting stood up in the cloud by the provider that you're purchasing as a service. So like secure remote worker, for example, I think that's an offering that Cisco had where they'd stand up a VPN head in AWS for you, where you could connect your remote workers to there, you could route directly to the cloud, or you could tie back into your head in, and gave you kind of the ability to scale to connect to your cloud apps, but not really send everything to your on-prem VPN solution and then back out to the cloud, right? So it's really cool, the evolution where we're seeing our networking, the full portfolio partners, right? Because they're pivoting more to that software, like I mentioned before, and that really enables that as a service to get beyond the data center and the cloud to more of the networking side of the house as well.
It's kind of interesting. Michael gets into his comfort zone with some of the networking and security and stuff. It was a little awkward that Cisco came out and said, I'm going to start with the data center stuff because they are at their core a networking and security, et cetera, company. So, where I deal with clients are, I'm going to move my entire data center to the cloud. That's core data center stuff. And that's what Cisco Hybrid Cloud is. What was more intuitive, Michael, is I want remote office as a service. I want coffee shop as a service. That includes my SASE and all of the things. I don't want to think about that as a service. It's actually a little bit simpler concept to go and say, well, you have 50 locations. Here it is for $2 an hour, as opposed to here's your data center, comparing that to cloud.
I was just going to bring that up because as Mike was talking about his stuff and you were talking about your stuff, Ken, I was thinking, well, great. Now we've got all this flexibility, but now there's this complexity of all of these different as a service offerings I have to bring together now for when I want a coffee shop as a service or, a home worker as a service. I think that's where somebody like Insight has to come and or could come and help out somebody with all of this stuff.
Oh, yeah. Definitely. If you think of a lot of the clients we deal with, they have multiple vendors in their environment, right? They could have HPE, they have Dell, Cisco. So that can get really complex if you're consuming as a service from each of those, right? And obviously we work with all those providers. Our managed services team works with our partners to bring in these services into the offering we come with. And that's what I think, I know this isn't a toot your horn session, but I mean, Insight is really
it's
good
gonna be.
at,
Yeah.
okay. so I mean, working with all these partners and bringing it all together into one cohesive solution. So, I mean, that way you're not having to pay Dell, HP, Cisco. It's more a monthly cost, one partner to work with, and you get that wrapper of managed services around the entire thing that works towards the 365, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day.
Yeah, and I mean, I was joking, not necessarily a toot your own horn session, but I think it's really important to bring up the fact that it's, how important, how about this, Ken? How important is an organization like Insight to the industry right now, doing what we do with all of these multiple vendors?
It is interesting because when you think about it, most of the OEMs have part of a solution. Now, you can argue, some say, I've got everything you need, but that's up to the customer to decide, do you have everything I need? So we've had kind of a breakthrough moment when we started talking about storage, and although everybody's got some storage, and the clients started saying it's a bigger, issue to run a workload, and we started working with them to do cloud. And so one of them that was on stage just last week, the CIO, is using this as a bridge to the cloud. Another is looking at this and saying, look, I've got literally 3,200 workloads. I don't know what to do. I either have to make a big Capex expenditure, or I'm going to bring in their case, Azure, and compare it to cloud. We actually did all the analysis, put it on an as a service, and said, oh, we can run your workloads for 7.9 cents an hour. The cloud provider, with all of its incentives, is offering it at 24 cents an hour. Which one makes sense to you? So at that point, he decided not to go to cloud. Now, you can't do that if you don't have the hosting, the compute, the storage, et cetera, to make that. And so, to your other point, the OEMs are like, oh my gosh, I got a client. This is a real story. A pseudo federal client has 18,000 workloads running in a VMware cloud, and he's paying $50 million a year. And he realizes, based on that math, I can do it for 12 million a year. That's good for the OEM. That's good for us. That's good for them, right? Yeah. And so I'm finally able to go and give a realistic comparison of, here's your data center in cloud, here's your data center in hybrid. What one makes most sense to you? So it's kind of a breakthrough moment, I think, in really creating some great conversations.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think we've got the tool set, we've got all of these things to do the appropriate analysis and to help folks make those decisions. I think, again, it's, I feel like I know what's going on in the industry, but as you figure out all of these different pieces and parts that you got to put together, it gets really complex. And then throw in things like we just kind of smoothed over, but like from a security perspective and all the other aspects that you've got to deal with, it gets even more complex. And I think that's where, somebody who can help put all of that together for you and then do it in a model that allows you to be more efficient, let's go across the headlines, flexible and get an as a service model. It's a win. And I love that utilizing this as a holding zone, if you will, while you try to figure out your next step. I also think, the model in general is a smart model because of your flexibility to be able to move one way or the other.
It's interesting being in this for, as a first mover. I think if you start Googling who's doing what with who, you realize we were first mover and we're learning a lot. The most difficult thing is it's different. Yep. Every client we talk to and have a discussion around this says, that was really a good use of my time. Thank you so much. This helps me plan. This gives me options I didn't have before. But it's different. My purchasing doesn't know how to buy things this way. Yeah. I've never done it this way. This makes a lot of sense. And so, in some cases, a very large organization says, well, I just need to talk to the OEMs one at a time and go direct. Well, if that OEM provides everything you need, this is my analogy of, our clients are all baking something, right? And the guy's selling storage, which is flour, let's just say. And the client's like, well, if I consume flour that way, I need eggs and frosting and other things that way, you know. So we are in a position to help them put these solutions together, you know, to meet what they're trying to do. But the biggest thing is you know, it is different. And you know, once I'll say this, every organization that has tried this has expanded it and grown it, and not one has said, I'm not going to renew and grow. So it is new.
I love it. No, and I think to your point, do you want to be the baker or do you want to eat cake? I mean, that's literally the difference between how this model works. So
Yeah.
with that relatively funny note, we'll probably close out. Any final words, Mike, Kent, for the folks out there? Where do you get started on this thing?
We'll start with you, Ken. Go ahead.
You know, I think we gave you the concept. You can read the reports from IDC, Gartner, everybody saying this is a tornado. 80% of things will be consumed this way. I think it makes sense for your organization to say, how does it affect my organization? We are not saying everybody's going to do this. Some people are even at Capex models, and that works perfectly fine. It really requires a discussion about, this is what I'm trying to achieve. These are the transformational things I'm trying to do. How could this help me or not in my planning? And you know, so we would really welcome the opportunity to sit down, understand what you're doing, understand your challenges, and if these models start to make sense to you, help you figure out how that works in your planning. I think that's the best thing is organization by organization, helping them understand how it fits, if it fits.
Yeah, and I'll tag on there because you covered a lot of what I wanted to say, but you said it much more eloquently. So
It's the deep voice.
Yeah, it is that deep voice. He's
And
got
the
that
cold.
voice for radio. So as we're talking about as a service or more the CapEx model, it obviously depends on where you're at, what your business is trying to do, what you're trying to achieve. If you're leaning on more of that CapEx model, though, that's where you really need to pay attention to the infrastructure, that whole software life cycle, where you're not getting in a position where you're accruing that technical debt and not getting the benefits out of the newer technologies, whether you're purchasing new technologies or whether you're consuming it as a service. So just there's a lot of different things you have to keep in mind if you're going that CapEx model versus the as a service. So like Ken said, we're definitely here. We're willing to have those conversations. And like I said before, just really excited to see how this is growing, how it's expanding really across the entire solution stack.
Thanks, guys. No, agreed. I think that it's an exciting thing that we're doing. And again, it's to Kent's point, it's different. And, you know, when things are different, leveraging a trusted party to come in and help you figure stuff out, that's where we're good. So we appreciate everybody listening today. If you want to know more about what we talk about and what we have talked about on this, please visit us at insightcdct.com. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. And thank you guys out there for watching.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks, Ken.